Have you ever wondered how ancient empires, without spreadsheets or supercomputers, managed economies stretching across continents? It's a fascinating story of power, control, and sometimes total collapse. Today, we're diving deep into the economic playbook of the ancient world. Let's start with the big picture: centralized versus decentralized control. Think of ancient Egypt. The pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was considered a god, and he owned everything. The entire economy was centrally planned from the top down. The state controlled the land, directed the labor for massive projects like the pyramids, and collected grain as taxes, which it then redistributed to the population. This system provided incredible stability for thousands of years, but it also limited individual economic freedom. Now, let's contrast that with the Roman Republic, which was more decentralized initially. Wealthy landowners and merchants had significant economic power. You could own your own land, run your own business, and accumulate private wealth. This created a dynamic and innovative economy. However, as the Republic transitioned into the empire, control became more centralized. The emperors needed to fund their massive army and public works, which led to a growing state role in the economy. This brings us to one of the most powerful tools any government has: taxation. Ancient empires were masters of it. In Rome, taxes were incredibly complex. There was the tributum soli, a tax on land, and the tributum capitis, a poll tax on individuals. Initially, they even used private tax collectors called publicani. These guys would bid for the right to collect taxes in a province. Whatever they collected above the bid price was their profit. As you can imagine, this system was often brutal and led to massive extortion of the local populations. It was a constant source of tension and rebellion. In Han Dynasty China, the system was different, but just as sophisticated. They had a land tax, a poll tax, and state monopolies on crucial commodities like salt and iron. Salt was essential for preserving food, and iron was vital for tools and weapons. By controlling these, the government secured a steady and massive stream of revenue, allowing it to fund everything from the Great Wall to canals connecting the north and south. This state control over key industries was a hallmark of Chinese economic policy for centuries. But what was the real currency of the ancient world? It wasn't always gold or silver. More often, it was grain. Grain was the ultimate source of wealth and power. In Egypt, the annual flooding of the Nile determined the harvest, and the pharaoh's control over the grain stores was his ultimate leverage. He could feed the army, pay the bureaucrats, and keep the populace from starving during lean years. This is what we call a redistributive economy. Similarly, Rome's famous bread and circuses policy was a direct consequence of this. The state provided free or heavily subsidized grain to the citizens of Rome to prevent social unrest. This required a colossal logistical effort, with fleets of ships crisscrossing the Mediterranean, bringing grain from fertile provinces like Egypt and North Africa. The entire imperial machine was geared towards securing this grain supply. Control the food, and you control the people. Land was the other pillar of the ancient economy. Owning land meant wealth, status, and power. In the Roman world, vast estates called latifundia were owned by the super-rich senatorial class and worked by enslaved people. This concentration of land ownership created huge social inequality and pushed small-scale farmers off their land. These displaced farmers often flooded into the cities, becoming a volatile urban population dependent on the state's grain dole. This was a ticking social time bomb. Labor was the engine that powered it all. And in many ancient empires, a significant portion of that labor was not free. Slavery in Rome was an industrial-scale institution. Enslaved people worked in mines, on farms, and in households. Their labor built the roads, aqueducts, and monuments we still admire today. While morally reprehensible, from a purely economic standpoint, it provided a source of cheap, exploitable labor that fueled Roman expansion and prosperity for centuries. In China and Egypt, forced labor, or corvée, was also common, where peasants were required to work on public projects for a certain number of days each year. Now, let's talk about a problem that feels very modern: inflation. Did ancient empires deal with this? Absolutely. One of the most famous examples comes from late Rome. As the empire overstretched and the costs of defense skyrocketed, emperors needed more money. Their solution? Devaluation. They started mixing cheaper metals like copper into their silver coins. A denarius that was once nearly pure silver became mostly bronze with a thin silver coating. People weren't fooled. They knew the coins were worth less, so they demanded more of them for goods and services. Prices spiraled out of control. This is a classic example of currency debasement leading to hyperinflation. To combat this, some emperors tried to implement price controls. The Emperor Diocletian in 301 AD issued the Edict on Maximum Prices. This decree set fixed prices for thousands of goods and services, from wheat and beef to haircuts and legal fees. The penalty for overcharging was death. But you can't just command an economy to behave. The edict was a spectacular failure. Goods disappeared from the market as producers couldn't afford to sell at the fixed low prices. A massive black market emerged, and the law was eventually ignored and abandoned. It was a powerful lesson that economic forces are often stronger than imperial decrees. So how did it all end? Economic failure was a major factor in the collapse of many ancient empires. For the Western Roman Empire, the combination of hyperinflation, crippling taxation, and the breakdown of trade was devastating. The state could no longer afford to pay its soldiers, who were increasingly non-Roman mercenaries. The tax base shrank as wealthy landowners created self-sufficient estates and essentially withdrew from the imperial economy. The intricate web of trade that held the empire together simply unraveled. Provinces that once supplied Rome with grain and goods had to fend for themselves. The economic heart of the empire stopped beating. From centralized command economies in Egypt to the more market-driven approach of early Rome, ancient rulers used a variety of tools to manage their realms. Taxation, control of essential resources like grain and land, and the exploitation of labor were the cornerstones of their power. But as we've seen, these systems were also fragile. Economic missteps like currency debasement and unsustainable taxation could lead to inflation, social unrest, and ultimately, the collapse of civilizations that once seemed invincible. It's a powerful reminder that a strong economy is the true foundation of any lasting empire. Thanks for joining me on this journey through ancient economics. If you found this interesting, be sure to like this video, subscribe for more deep dives into history, and hit that notification bell. Let me know in the comments which ancient empire's economy you find most fascinating. See you next time.